Hello and welcome to The Lounge. I'm your host, Sarah Calmetta, and we are here today with a good friend of mine, Rhett, who I've met through the aerospace industry. Here in The Lounge, we create an experience where you can listen to different people's journeys, understand how that might apply to your path, and emerge stronger on the other side with some useful new perspectives and tools at your disposal. Today, Rhett and I are going to be diving into her tagline, Becoming Hard to Kill. Now, this is something she's gone through from personal experience, but I think it's an ethos that we can all learn from and adopt in our day-to-day lives. So to get us started, the quote that I chose for today is, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced." Rhett, it's a pleasure to have you with me here today.
Oh, this is going to be fun and terrifying, which is also fun in its own way.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for saying yes to a live show. I know that there were some nerves beforehand, which a lot of people experience. And yet that is also why you are hard to kill, I imagine, because you have that can-do attitude and you say yes to things even when they scare you.
Oh, yes, that is very true. That is kind of a necessity I've learned.
Absolutely. So, Rhett, tell me a little bit in your own words about your background. I know that, we met through the space industry analog astronaut conference first, and then Space Kind. You were in my cohort as well in the small group, which was wonderful. And you're the director and founder of the Viking Mars Missions Education and Preservation Project, which is a non-for-profit. Tell me a little bit more about your journey on how you got there and why this is so important to you.
Sure, absolutely. I think my journey didn't actually get me there. I think I was actually born into that journey, to be honest, because my father was a student at MIT, and he was actually working on the very first mission to Mars, which was at the time called the Voyager mission to Mars. So he was writing a paper, which, I was going to bring it up and show it. He was writing a paper on what would be a meteorology suite, i.e. a weather station on Mars, while he was a student. And then the project got defunded under that name, and 6 months later refunded under the Viking mission to Mars. And by that time, he'd moved from MIT, where he got his master's, to UCLA, where he was studying for his PhD. My brother was born while my dad was in school at MIT. And then I popped up in California at UCLA. So I was literally born into the space industry. And my dad was a scientist on that team then. And then later became the first the first NGO to ever run a mission.
Wow.
Because the NASA mission was a 90-day, the Viking mission was a 90-day primary mission, and then was extended twice. But at that point, the budgets were all pre-allocated. It's not like the budget ran out. So people say that kind of thing, and it's just not true. These budgets get allocated like years in advance. So the budget following the 2 years, 3 years, which was phenomenal, that was not planned, right, was already allocated to the shuttle, to the Voyager mission, which took the name Voyager, and to a Helios mission to study the sun. So at that point, it was like my dad's instrument was still running. I think at that point, his was the imaging, and my dad's instrument were the two primary things. And the orbiter was also, one of the orbiters was still running. And my dad, being his amazing, beautiful, and autistic self, said, "You're not shutting down my instrument." I mean, he without certainty, he definitely said that to NASA. Wow. He probably didn't ask them. He just said, "You're not doing it." Yeah. And then this amazing astrophysicist student, Stan, and some of the people that everybody knows about, like Carl Sagan and Ray Bradbury and Heinlein and a bunch of other people, rallied behind my dad and the mission to keep it alive, and actually had a fundraising campaign that raised enough money to basically show to NASA that if they shut the mission down, they probably would get some kickback. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
So they turned the mission over to my dad, and he then ran it from the University of Washington. So yeah, I just was born into it, and I'm a geek like my dad. We might touch on this. I'm also, it turns out, likely autistic like my dad, but in a different way, my own flavor. And yeah, I love it. Space to me was, number one, it was the place where everybody belonged if they wanted to be there. And that was super important to me as a kid that didn't really feel like I had a space except in my family sometimes. And
right, that's how we all feel, I think.
right, exactly. And then, out in space, it was just 100% everybody experiences it. You look up.
Mm.
And it's yours. It belongs to you, right? And
Right.
I don't mean belong in the ownership sense, but maybe you belong to it is a better way.
Yes. I was just going to say
We
that.
all
Yeah.
belong to space. So
I love that. That's a great, yeah. And I just have goosebumps because so many, whether you're a space geek or not, right? When we look up into the stars or when we're looking at this beautiful landscape in front of us, that sense of awe comes in. And,
yes.
that is what actually brings us closer together, makes us zoom out and realize that, our problems are like this teeny little thing. And we're on this speck of this rock floating in space. We're already on a spaceship. We're already in space.
We're in space.
We're already in the ecosystem of space. Like we're not separate from it.
That's
And
right.
so that's why it's so important for, people like yourself and your father to be communicators about the space industry. And I love that it was this like David and Goliath story there where he stood up to NASA and was just like, no, this, I
said some
know
other
it's not happening. I wonder if you got any traits from him.
No comment. I actually have an apology that I'm like going to send to one of the past NASA administrators. I'm writing a letter on behalf of my dad to this one. It's not really an apology but I'm to one of the NASA administrators in the past because my dad actually told him in a meeting that he was an idiot. Like out in front of like the world. So that wasn't really a great move, but my dad was autistic and he just didn't really get it.
Right. So the social norms did not make sense.
Huh.
And, and to that point, whether we're talking about the space industry or aviation or any highly technical field, there's a lot of people on the spectrum. I mean, I believe I'm on the spectrum. Anyone who is a savant in a certain area or who geeks out on certain pieces of information, right? We're all different. And the funny thing is that the world is just designed for like this one kind of avatar, this one way of thinking and being. And yet there's so many variations. So this whole like neurodivergence thing, it's 40% of the population has that divergence. That's just normal. That's not
exactly.
It's not weird. It's not a problem to be solved. It's just the way of experiencing life.
Yeah. I like to look at it as like people talk about being like a snowflake. And I don't mean the silly way that people talk about it now, but like an actual, I think of humans as being millions of snowflakes.
All different.
And like one individual is actually made up of millions of snowflakes.
I see.
And then those snowflakes are actually our traits.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when you talk about spectrum disorders, which is to me not really what it is. It's just, to me, they're just traits. Like my dad and I are complete, like my dad was challenged with communication. Mm-hmm. I hyper focus on communication. So I'm like, it's like in social behavior. So like, that's totally my thing. Right. And I love it. And people fascinate me. So I do make mistakes still a lot, but I don't make the same mistakes as my dad, who I actually had to kind of like try to teach how to smile.
That's right.
Just didn't really know how to formulate feelings in that way. So those things like being on the spectrum just means like, okay, so I like to hyper focus on things and, I may be good in this area and I may not take no for an answer or whatever, but my dad's version of this thing is completely different than mine, just like everyone out there. That's why they're just traits. It's like being left-handed or right-handed. It's just like we all have different traits.
I love that analogy of this snowflake because snowflakes are all unique in their expression, yet they can also clump together and become part of a snowdrift. And so they're different characteristics of the same thing. It's very akin to we're all just drops of water in the ocean. Mm-hmm. And,
but
so
people.
But we are the ocean, right? Yes. And, to your point about saying, teaching your father to smile, it's interesting because actually in some cultures, smiling is a form of aggression because you're showing
your teeth. Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
And in the animal kingdom. And so that's what I love about having so many different types of guests on the show, because we're looking at these different perspectives and understanding how they serve our experience and how they limit our experience, because there's going to be a limit and a serve to everything. And we can get very dogmatic and precise and, this is the one way that it has to be, when that is just not how the world works, right? We are complex enough beings in our intellect that we can hold two opposing thoughts, diametrically opposed. Both can be true, And we can still believe both of them to be true, maybe not at the same time or in a different context, but yet it doesn't have to derail our entire reality.
Absolutely.
So that's very fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk to you a little bit about navigating these challenges that life has brought you. I'm sure you've experienced a lot just in the way that you communicate and the way that people fascinate you, and then understanding not everybody operates that way.
Yeah.
And that, life brings you different challenges, right? You witnessed your father standing up to NASA and saying, no, you're not shutting this down. And then he got to run it over here and, moving. And so what are some of the challenges that life has brought you? And what are the things that helped you to accept with equanimity as much as possible, those things, so that you could continue living your life rather than getting derailed by it?
Well, I'll start it with things that I witnessed first, because I've always been kind of an outside in person for a variety of reasons. Where to me, the more important thing was the world around me and the people around me. And and this is partly because I didn't, well, I can address that differently maybe. But anyway, I think the thing that gave me the most strength to address the things that the trauma and the experiences that did happen to me was that at a really, really young age, and I've talked about this before, and I remember the very first incident, at a really, really young age, I saw other people being mistreated, profoundly mistreated, that were different from me. And that's because of where I grew up. And so I had a ton of privilege, and yet my friends did not. And so I witnessed, like, just the incident that I remember, the youngest incident that I remember was me going up to the drugstore at the corner street when the school bus dropped me off. And I was like first, second, and third grade. I really don't know what age I was when that happened, in there somewhere. And I went into Mr. Wong's drugstore because they had a comic book rack. And I'm like, took a comic book, sat on the ground, and started reading it. And that's what I did every day when my mom wasn't there to pick me up. So she knew where to find me, right? In the drugstore, reading comics. So I was sitting in there just reading a comic like I did all the time. And this young kiddo walked in, and he took a comic book and he sat down right next to me. And we were just sitting there reading comic books. And then Mr. Wong came running around the corner and he said, "You can't steal my comic book." And he grabbed it out of the other kid's hand while I was sitting right there doing the same thing. And he said, "I'm going to call the police. Where's your mother? Who are you? You can't steal from me."
Wow.
And I looked up at him. I said, "Mr. Wong, we're just reading comic books." And he said, he actually ignored me. And he's like, "You can't do this." And he, kind of not too gently grabbed the kid by his coat and sort of hauled him off to the front. And I said, "But Mr. Wong, we're just reading comic books. He's not stealing anything." And it was so traumatizing to watch this. And I didn't understand at that moment what was happening. But I went back and I talked to my mom about it. I'm like, "What's happening?" That kiddo was a Black kid. And my mom's like, "That's not right." And she actually went and, I'm sure, spoke to Mr. Wong, because my mom was super, no
injustice there.
No injustice, which I do know where I got that from. But just seeing that as a kid and just being so flummoxed. So I was like, okay, this is not okay. And my, I learned from Mom very much not to be, to fight, not just to stand back and think, oh, this isn't okay, which honestly is what most people do, but to actually do something. And so that was really the lens that I viewed most, that I've continued to view my life through. It's like, what can I do to make a difference? Like, I'm not into the Scouts, but I do like the leave it better than you found it.
Yes.
That's sort of the context of, and I think when you are thinking about other people, and you always know that other people have it worse and that other people are suffering things, that's one thing that makes you not feel alone. And I think one of the hardest things in all kinds of trauma, like every kind, we can talk a little bit about, is that one of the scariest things is just feeling alone.
Yes.
So in that way, witnessing that kind of thing, I knew that I wasn't alone in this sort of big sense. I'm talking about the specific things more. I definitely felt alone. And I think a lot of people do, which is part of the reason why I, am here today. And also because I trust Sarah to be gracious and gentle with me, is that the othering, the things that I survived, and that's really what this is about. It's about being a survivor, right?
Mhm.
And not just surviving, but thriving. I didn't even understand what they all were, some of them until pretty recently. Um, and those things include, um, well, and this is a trigger for people, so I will say it. I was assaulted in high school, sexually assaulted in high school, and didn't tell anybody, and was forced to see that person around me for all of my life. Like I only just blocked them, even from, like, they tried to join me on Facebook, and I'm like, no, but I'm still close with their family, so
Mhm.
they're around you. So that's something that was really hard. Like how, and just to share with people that this isn't the kind of thing that happens. It happens in so many different ways. And the reason it happened to me was because I was drugged. I was actually roofied.
Mm.
So it does happen.
Absolutely. And it's not the fault of the person who it happens to,
Well, exactly. It's not the fault.
and yet we adopt these thoughts and this
What did
shame.
I do? Was
We
I?
try to Yeah, we try to hide it and project outward that we're strong, we're capable instead of asking for help. And, particularly back then, we didn't have the language and tools that we have available now. And even so, it still happens to a staggering degree.
Hugely, and
Yeah,
not just to women and girls. It happens to all genders.
absolutely.
Like,
Yes.
and I've, yeah, and so that's it. There's nothing to be ashamed of, but there isn't always the language to talk about it either. So I
Right.
certainly didn't talk about it, and I had other things happen when I was younger that I didn't have any language for either, that were also not appropriate, and not to that degree. But it is something that happens a lot.
Absolutely. And
And
language is important because it frames our experience. It's what creates our reality.
yeah,
And so if we don't understand how to name it and how to process it, then we stay stuck in that fear
can be very
and we're not able to move past it. And then, the body keeps the score. There's going to be traumas. Little T traumas can build up to a big T trauma effect, just like a big T trauma can have a devastating physical or psychosomatic effect as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, the ways that I dealt with it, so I'm a writer. And one of the things that really helped me a lot was, number one, the perspective, which is what I talked about first.
Mhm.
Um, and because I'm a writer, I've been writing since third grade, like literally poetry, just a lot, journaling, you name it. I have a whole series that I'm publishing soon called, well, it's not called this, but I refer to it as my pissed off poetry, which is
Oh, I
like
love that.
observations of things that just piss me off. And there's a whole lot of them, right? And so I just write. Like, I literally, I don't edit my writing. I have to, write. I'll be driving down the street or road or whatever, and something will come to me, and I literally have to pull over and write.
Yeah.
And so, not every writer obviously is that way by any means, but for
Well,
me,
some
it's
some
been,
would be auditory as well. I mean, you could always, verbally record yourself. I know a lot of people, especially if we don't write that thought down or record it somehow,
100%.
we might lose it, right? But this
And
sounds like
that's,
this has been very integral to your experiencing and being able to process what you're experiencing as well.
yeah. And I will actually say that I don't always write like with my hands, but
Mm.
that brings me to a different thing that, surviving, and that's a brain injury, which I had 12 years ago when I was hit by a truck on the freeway.
Wow.
And that was, my whole focus was on my kiddo, who was also in the car with me. And fortunately, they were fine. Good Lord.
Yeah.
But that was all I was thinking about. And so that whole thing played out very differently, and I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but suffice just to say that I couldn't do puzzles, and I started discovering things that were missing in from my brain,
Mhm.
sort of.
How did that affect your identity and
And
how you viewed yourself?
um, so prior to that, which brings us to another sort of thing, I 100% identify with what's in my heart and soul and what's in my brain.
Mm.
And the reasons for that is because I don't actually identify with my body, which is something that Sarah knows about me. And that's something that I've felt and known since I was, as young as like 3-4 years old. I remember being in LA when I lived there till I was 5. I remember being made to wear a skirt for these school pictures. And I just felt like so insanely vulnerable. As a kid, I didn't even know how to describe it, but just really scared because it made me feel like all the things that well, at that time, the one thing that I didn't, that made me feel not good about myself was part of my body that felt very vulnerable at that point. Again, this might be another trigger warning. So I had gender dysphoria at a very, very young age. There were no words for that. As I started growing up, and actually I grew up in a certain way very early, much earlier than girls my age. And so people started noticing me for these reasons that I was evolving. My body was evolving.
Right.
And I hated it. Because I don't identify with my body at all. And so it was incredibly hard. And back in the 70s and 80s and 60s, which, as a little kid, it was different. It was the way that I experienced it was actually quite different when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 to when I started puberty and experienced it in a whole nother way to as an adult and everything. But suffice it to say that I've never identified with my body. And now there's words for that. Like I have a word and I didn't even name it. Like my kid actually was the one who was like, "Hey mom, you're non-binary." And I'm like, "What does that mean?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh." So, and because those words and that language has evolved, thank goodness. And I'm like, "You mean there's other people like that? There's other people that would like to just, remove all their body parts that have significance to people that don't have a significance to you." The only things that I could relate to was like David Bowie, right? So he was kind of like a hero guy because he sort of had this androgynous thing. And so that was the word that I sort of loosely associated with. Yeah. But even then I didn't talk about it. Right.
Right.
The first class I ever took in college was called The Psychology of Gender Roles and I don't even know why they offered it, but I loved Jane Jaquette. She's the teacher. The fact that they offered that in 1984 was amazing, number one.
Right.
And number two, I was like, oh my God, there's a class with a title like that. So maybe there's something more than these two things that we've been telling about. And maybe I'm not the only person that feels this way. So I had to take that class. It was interesting.
I love that. Oh, I'm sure. I mean, gender roles too. It's not even just, the masculine and feminine. We all have those energies within us. We just tend to lump them into completely one or the other based on the physical body. But, I definitely have a lot more masculine than feminine characteristics, qualities, traits, what have you. And I lived in that world for a very long time and only recently learned how to soften and step into what the feminine energy feels like and not be afraid of that. Right. And there's a lot of people on the male side that might have experienced that and everything in between. It's all a spectrum. Right. And so that's really powerful that you were able to take that class and, that your child was able to help you identify. Now, how did that make you feel when she helped you to identify that and understand that?
I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
I learned from my kiddo and other young people, like I mentor youth. So I learn from them all the time. I'm like a sponge. I love just hearing things that I haven't heard before. And I like debating them. And I'll be like, but what about this? But what about that? What about this? What about that? Like, because I really want to know. I want to dig in deep. That's just.
Yeah. Curiosity and the Socratic method and going into like, is this absolutely true? And if not, then, okay, what about this? And is this absolutely true?
Or is anything absolutely true?
Right. And so we get to understand that everything is actually a subjective experience. Absolutely. My reality and your reality are different, essentially hallucinations of our own mind. And they're meeting right now through the interweb, right? There's even some other hallucination in your background. We noticed, right? This little blue image
I know. Like
that's in your chair. See,
you know what? I think maybe I just figured out what it is. Hang on. Oh, I think I just figured out what it is.
Yeah.
It's the shiny seat behind me reflecting my screen. Except
Wow.
that there's no planet on it still, and that's what's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, it looks like a
Blue
planet.
planet. So the aliens are probably just projecting in because we're talking about the Viking Mars mission, and they're like,
Metaphysical.
these two women are gonna accept our transmission pretty well. So, let's just go with that. For everybody who knows me, they're like, yes, UAP conversation. Man, I would love to get some of the, there's a lot of UAP conferences happening right now, discussions in Congress and stuff. I'd love to get somebody on.
Oh my gosh, you should check out my friend Mark Hartzman. He's written a book on them. I would normally in a normal conversation, I'd get up and run over and grab it and
that's okay. So what you can do is after we're done, comment on LinkedIn with the link for that book, because I'm sure there's going to be people watching this.
He does amazing research. He does amazing research, and he writes books about these really obscure topics.
I love that.
Which is how I met him.
I love that. Yeah. So now, as you were navigating these challenges of, starting to understand, you thought differently, you felt differently. Mm-hmm. I know you're a survivor multiple times over from some different health complications. Yeah. So how did you go about, what was it that helped you to accept these things instead of falling into victimhood or suffering endlessly? What were some of the tools that helped you with that?
Well, I'm not going to say that I accept them. So I will say that I wholeheartedly reject my cancer, and I'm working actively to eradicate it. And I guess I didn't really mention that before. So I also have terminal cancer. But I've had terminal cancer now for 12 years. So, so when I was diagnosed, which actually happened 3 months before I was hit by the truck. So it's kind of funny in a way. I had surgery for stage 4 metastatic cancer that was in my liver, colon, intestines, where they removed my gallbladder, a bunch of stuff. Wow. So I'm like Frankenstein's bride or whatever. It's amazing.
You're a miracle.
It is amazing how much stuff you can live without. And it's also really funny when they take a bunch of stuff out that the stuff that's left actually floats up in the cavity. So whenever I get like a scan, the people who are looking at the scans that are doing it, they're like, wait, where's that thing I'm looking for? And it's never in the right place. And I love it. It's so funny to watch their faces when they're trying to find something.
I could see you totally just being overjoyed by this whole process.
It's funny. I think it's really funny. And I'm like, yeah, you might want to look in my armpit to find my stomach.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is that humor, levity.
Oh yeah. Humor
has allowed you. And so when I say accept, maybe that's, in context of you're not accepting that you have cancer, but you're accepting that this is your situation. And despite that, you're not giving up. You're still living your life. You're still doing things. You're not just rolling over and going, okay, well, that's it then. The game's over. And so I mean acceptance more in the sense of I'm not going to fight reality and, live in this painful existence. I'm just simply going to create my own reality and live my life from there.
Yes. And I will definitely say that probably my autism has helped me in that respect. So I can't take entire credit. I think that my brain just doesn't take no for an answer, similar to my dad. So to me, and I've also witnessed a lot of people that just complain a lot and it annoys me. So that's probably part of it.
Complaining does nothing for anybody.
No, it really doesn't. But I know where that comes from. So I'm like, oh gosh, I feel their pain. And I'm like, and then, you want to help people. And so, I've done a lot of things for communities just in small groups that will help them sort of deal with stuff and give them other options to live better. Because there's a lot of things that I can't do now. Like a lot.
So having appreciation for those things. What I'm hearing is by you giving back to these communities, you're also serving yourself, filling your own cup. In a different way. It's nourishing for you.
I would say that my survival also is partly because I can give back, even though I can't work and do the things that
You're in community. And community is powerful for
I can make a difference in the world. And that's, So this whole concept of disability, which is one that I live with every day, is, I'll say angrifying, which is not a word. But it's regardless of what we can't do, there's still other things that we can do. Now, maybe we can't do them. Maybe we can't get up and get paid to do them. Like I don't get paid to do anything,
right?
But I can still call one of the students that I mentor and say, hey, I saw that post. It was amazing. you did a great job. Or I can, or I meet with them and they're like, I'm struggling with this teacher or this person that is being biased against me, or I want to switch my career from this to this. And so, I can help them navigate those things by just being creative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my creativity has been one of the things that has helped me survive, and being able to, I'm going to use your word, Sarah, being able to pivot, which is a great word, from one thing to another. And I will actually say, I didn't think about this before, that started as early as college, because I was trained, my degree was in biology, languages, and art. So I was trained to be a technical illustrator of anything complex and scientific. So natural science, yada, yada. But my creativity, so right after I got my degree, I was actually hit by a car in a different place and different time. And I ruptured, I tore all the ligaments in my wrists, so I couldn't draw anymore. My hands weren't even stable. So here I go to college for 4 years to get a degree in essentially technical illustration. And I couldn't hold my hands steady anymore. And I'm like, oh, fiddlestick, So I'm like, okay, pivot, again, it's a great word. So
It is.
So yeah, having to be creative and figure out what else to do, by just testing the waters and trying things, just being like, as scared as I was all the time, I will say pretty much all the time, until I literally was out of college. I was in my late 20s before I wasn't petrified all the time.
Wow.
And I mean, like, really scared, like not scared of, like, just where did I belong in the universe? Part of it was because of the gender stuff. And if you saw me back in when I was in my 20s, I got a lot of unwanted attention. I'll just put it that way. And all the attention was drawn to a part of me that I didn't associate with. I don't consider myself a woman. I didn't then, but I didn't really know that was a thing. But what I do know is that every time I got even a compliment, oh my gosh, you're beautiful, whatever, it didn't feel like a compliment.
Right.
Because I would walk by a mirror and not see myself. Like, I never saw myself.
So what a powerful thing to then be able to step into seeing yourself, and then using that as a platform in which you can help mentor youth. You can also help bring equity into the missions that you're doing with Viking and all the different projects that you're working on, because so often our superpowers and how we serve the world stem from the experience that we've been through. And in navigating that, we find that sweet spot of that, like, liminal space of understanding, oh, this is what other people are going through also. Right. And so because you had this experience of intense identification, you can also look at these other groups out there, whether it's marginalization from gender or race or culture or age, whatever, name it. Then
now I'm almost 60. I got it all, baby. I got it all.
You're on level 60, right? That's great. You're on like the boss level.
Yeah, I'm good with my age, actually. It's fine.
I definitely love hearing. I heard that introduction to age. It's, one, I heard somebody ask, how many years has your body been on this earth, rather than asking how old you are, because that shows, like, your body might be a certain age, but you could be a very different mentally spot, right?
Or you're just the same. Like, I'm always like, I don't think I think my body has surpassed, like, it's just changed, but everything on the inside is just the same.
Right. Exactly.
And age is funny that you mentioned that too. Like, I actually got a kick out of it when I turned, because I never identified with my body anyway. I was just able to, like, make fun of it, kind of.
Yeah.
And so when I was getting ready to turn 50, I was like, okay, what's the best way to think, to refer to myself? So instead of saying I'm 50, I said I'm half a century.
Yeah, that's great.
I love the way that sounds, because it's funny. It has this sort of historical context, like dinosaur-ish. It's just like, I'm half a century.
You should say it in like a Sean Connery voice too,
I'm half a century.
Yeah, there we go.
That did not work. Sorry.
That was pretty. I heard it.
Okay.
It's funny, because I just saw something the other day, and it was like, instead of saying I'm single, say I'm a lone rider or something like that, or I'm a sole operator or something, because
Oh, yeah.
I'm
So,
like
yeah.
mysterious
Sorry,
and like
smooth operator just came in.
yeah.
You said that. That's funny. That's interesting. Yeah, that's another term. Like, there's so many things that when you don't fit into this sort of box, that this pre-constructed infrastructure that has been superimposed over us primarily by Western culture, I'll just say that.
Yeah.
You feel all sorts of different things, and they're not, if you don't fit into that, you're like, what? This doesn't even make sense. Like, it's not
Right.
even logical, right? And
Well, boxes help us make sense of things, yet for the most part, we don't fit into boxes. And it's in
yeah,
that discovery that the box that you're in, you feel like everyone else has put you there, but in actuality, the door is open and you're just staying in there.
yeah. And
And so
I
that's
just
where the awareness begins.
yeah, and I just knew that I never fit in a box, and even though I was scared of, because I didn't know, because I felt that alone feeling, right?
Right.
Like, until I knew that there were other people out there that felt like me, I did have that sense of alone, but I also didn't let that be me. Like, that was not me, because I knew everything in my brain and my heart and soul, that stuff was solid, like good stuff. Like, I got, I felt really strongly about that. And that really was my definition of myself. My id was entirely in my soul and my intellect. So when I did actually have the brain injury, that was the biggest hit I think I've ever had, was losing that function.
Yeah.
And then I had a stroke 2 years ago, which made it a whole lot worse. And that's been challenging.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing this with us,
Well,
because it's important people see that you can go through hard things and you can still get back up again
yeah,
and and enjoy your life and live your life.
absolutely, and make a difference. I think, again, if there's people out there that are feeling like they're less than because of a disability, God, don't, because you aren't made up of the things that you can't do. You are made up of everything that you can do.
Absolutely.
And that's what to me, that's what wholeness is. Wholeness is, who are you and what are you capable of? And you never lose that and you really don't even lose it when you die, because people remember you, right? But it's never what you aren't, it's what you are. And
Love that.
you will always be that. I can't draw like I used to, but I can still do art. I can make, stuff, and I do. I can write, and even doing things like this, like being on camera with this body, I call it my vessel, that I don't associate with. What I do is I kind of treat it like dressing up. I'm actually writing my autobiography at the behest of my child, who I love. And so I refer to my vessel as a costume. And if I want to achieve something, I think to myself, okay, which costume should I put on? And so I dress the vessel up in these various costumes, or even the vessel itself, and then I go about attempting to do what I want to do. So it's never about this. It's always about what my intent is and what I want to do and accomplish, and how can I best do that? So, yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And it's the way that we express ourselves through dress or through our, our vessel, that also changes our experience. I mean, look at little kids when they put on a superhero costume, right? All of a sudden, the most shy child is like gregarious and out there doing things.
Yeah.
And so it's really powerful to be able to reframe it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I'm hearing is that you're taking the things that are within your control and you're finding ways to make it fun. You're bringing levity to the situation. You're making it a game. And you're using this as a pathway to also connect to others who may not yet have those insights or may not have come across that bridge. And you're showing them the way, right?
Yeah, just trying to share tools, right?
Yeah.
And, well, it's funny too, because even when I was little, like, I had to navigate this completely alone, because there was nobody that I spoke to about it. And so I started doing things like, I had a whole bunch of tics when I was young. I literally had facial tics. So I had to figure out, I'm like, okay, people were merciless, to be honest. Kids were merciless. There were names that I was called that, actually, I look at them now, they're kind of funny, but they were horrifying to me. And I still remember, like, at the school that I went to, Bush School, really, wealthy people went there, blah, blah, blah. They used to call me Agnes Liverharter. And they called me that because it was the name that and I found out, like somebody told me, that was the ugliest name that we could think of. And we wanted the ugliest name to refer to you as. They didn't actually say it in those highbrow terms, but like, yeah, we just picked the ugliest name we could think of. And I'm like, okay. So I know, right? So I had all these like nervous tics. I would talk like really fast and a lot when I was really nervous. And I know that people do that. I see people doing it. And when I see a young person or an older person doing that, I swear to God, not that I would ever enter anybody's body space, but I just want to hold them and say, God, I feel you. You are not alone. This sucks. Breathe.
Yes. I mean, this is why I made these little stickers for my keynote, and they just say, just breathe.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Just take a deep breath. It's going to be okay.
And for me, because I didn't know those things as an adult, right? I figured that stuff out later. But as a kid, what I would do is I would take specific pieces of clothing. Like I had these purple high top tennis shoes that we got at Wajamaya's. And those were my super shoes. And I would put them on and I felt like $1 million. I felt like I could jump over fences. I did try that, did not work. But I still felt like I felt more powerful. I'm like, even though I didn't make that fence, I still feel like I jumped higher than I did without them. Right.
Yes.
So I created these little things around me in like first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade until I actually got kind of cognizant enough to like find out things that actually really kind of, might work a little better.
Yeah.
But I did
power shoes. You were already stepping into power shoes.
Yeah. I had to navigate the world in some way that made it feel safe for me because the world did not feel safe, And so those are things. Yeah.
I was going to say, I love that you found a way to create safety for yourself, right? Instead of waiting for it to happen for you, you found things that gave you these little elements of safety. And then from there, it allowed you to be more authentic. It allowed you to operate at a different level than if you were just constantly on defense because you didn't create that for yourself.
Yeah. And I think the creating for itself, again, goes back to the creativity, but it also goes back, I think I actually don't know what it is, but the survivorship gene, I don't know, maybe there's something like that. Just like, I always knew that nobody was going to rescue me and that I had to do it myself. And so just knowing that from a very young age, or feeling that, knowing is probably the wrong word. Because I think if my parents knew what was going on, if they had known that happened in high school and even before, they would have done something. But since I didn't tell them, they had no way of knowing. But I felt as though I had to figure it out myself. And just that sense of, okay, you got to do this, made me have perseverance, right? I think when you ask the question, what's your superpower? I'm like, I asked other people because I was kind of like, I don't know. But perseverance was the thing that came up most consistently. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably about right.
I love that. Isn't that the name of the Mars rover?
It is. And what's really funny is, because I always send names into all the Mars missions because like for all the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
So that was actually one of the names that I picked. But a million people picked it. Like a whole bunch of people picked it. Right.
Yeah.
And sent it in.
So consensus there.
So I remember seeing that announcement. I was like, oh my God, that's so cool.
Yes. Well, because when a million people pick it, then this is created like this community and this unity of, we chose that together. Right. And that became a reality.
Interesting. I don't really feel like maybe there is a togetherness in there. Although I never went like, oh, I picked that. Like I never had that sense. I was just like, oh my God, they picked that name that I loved. Again, it was it's hard to describe. It's sort of more of an outside of me experience.
Well, it makes you feel like you're part, like your thought mattered. It was part of something. Right. And so maybe it was a sense of that, perhaps.
Yeah. I just love that they picked it. I felt it was more magical to me. It was more like that name was meant to be picked. And it really has nothing to do with me. Like I literally don't connect myself with a lot of things. And that might be an autistic thing. I really have no idea. I'm still learning. I have no idea. But I love to connect people. And yet I don't actually I don't think it's me doing a lot of things that happen, even with my mentees and stuff. Like, it's not me that's doing any of that stuff.
Oh no,
I'm
you're
I'm
just
sharing
becoming a mirror for
the
them.
road with them,
Absolutely.
right? I'm
Yeah.
just standing next to them and, whatever. Yeah, I think it's really just things happen almost like there's yeah, I don't know. I think you can guide people without actually being the, I think guiding is better than leading in some cases. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, so you're the lighthouse. You're not the rescuer going out into the ocean to go save somebody. You are the lighthouse, and that's what's drawing people back to a safe shore.
Interesting. I'll have to think about that. I don't
Yeah.
know. Lighthouse is pretty shiny for me.
Well, you've got a shiny chair reflecting some
I
planet
do have a
here,
shiny
so,
chair.
maybe that you got your own lighthouse, like, right now in your in your background.
Who knows? I don't know what. Some kind of mystic stuff going on back
All right, we're gonna have to rapid fire the next two questions that I always like to
there.
ask my guests, because I feel like we could talk for hours, which is definitely a sign that we should probably get you back on the show to talk about some of these other things more in depth. But who would you say is on your personal board of directors? These are the people that you touch base with, use their lens of philosophy or ideology to make decisions, and they can be people in your personal network,
Mhm.
people that you know, um, or don't know, excuse me, or an avatar. So they can be past, present, future, a character from a film, or people that you do know.
Yeah, that was interesting. So it's kind of funny in a way. I thought of this two ways because I always, whenever I think about something, I usually come at it from about three or four different ways because
That's
I
great
never,
practice.
well, it's not even something I do consciously. I just can't help. I'm like, well, what about this? And then what about this? And what about this? So I'm kind of like playing all these different, like my nickname in school for a while for many years was Spock. Which everybody thought was an insult. And I
Very.
was like,
You're like, oh my gosh, this is
right on.
great. Yeah.
I did not know that to me that was not an insult. Anyway, but so in one way, and my child would definitely agree with me. I like inventing things and doing things my own way. And so I want to figure out how to do it alone.
Mm.
And then that has nothing to do with, there's also the fact that I don't like asking for help, but that's totally a different thing. I actually just, my personality likes to figure stuff out myself. So I actually like to make mistakes. I'm okay with that. So I would rather, if it's my electricity or my plumbing in my house, not so much. But I did actually tile my own house. I did actually rip the floor up and put new, like, so I like to do things myself. So in that sense, there's this one part of me that doesn't really, like, I don't read self-help books. I don't do any of that stuff. I like to figure it out because I think there's lessons in the figuring it out process.
Oh,
And it's also
absolutely.
okay. And I think that's also an artifact of not really identifying with other people.
Mhm.
So it's an artifact as well. But as far as people that I really thought hard about that, and there's really three people that come to mind. Number one, my child. So I ask my child things, what they think about things, and maybe, and I always have, even when they were young, I would say, well, what do you think about this? um, and I love getting that perspective from them. And they've always given me good, thoughtful. They're very thoughtful, so they've always given me good, input. And then I have just one of my favorite people on the planet. Her name is Debbie. She knows who she is. And yeah, I share everything we talk, we share stuff.
Hmm.
And I value her input. I and then the other person, and this is because I had to choose specific people. And then there's my cousin Jennifer. And so those are I would say my board of directors. But in the other sense, the piece that we talked about before, which is me being an observer, I honestly love to learn from everybody. So I would really like to hear everybody's opinion. Okay, how can I do this better? So there's not wanting, there's like, I want to try it myself, break it, screw it up. And then I'll be like, okay, now what do you think?
Yeah.
And then I want
There's
to
a
hear
healthy
from everybody.
tension there. So that there's a healthy tension there because
Yeah.
it means you're going to not enmesh with other people's decisions and, be codependent on their answer and people please, yet you are still curious enough to take on board what's another perspective here.
Oh, there's always going to be so many things that will never even occur to me. Like,
Right.
I just be like, oh my God, where'd that come from? That's such a great idea.
Well, that's the power of any form of group learning, particularly when you're at higher levels of education, like an MBA, where you have different people from different industries and levels coming in. And when the astrophysicist asks a question and you're an engineer and you're like, how, I mean, yeah, I want to know the answer too, but how did you even come up with that question? Like, I wasn't even in that realm. I was over here. Right. And that's what's so powerful.
And Viking, Jim Martin, who led Viking, he started that movement he actually had a badgeless community working on the mission. He had all these people working together, and they didn't even know where they came from, what companies they came from. Because he said, you're not from Cornell and MIT and Stanford, which are always like, right? You're on the Viking team. That's it. Perfect. That's where it begins and ends. So
yes, so we get to do that in our own lives. So maybe the invitation for everyone here, especially as we're wrapping up the end of the year, what are you creating for 2025? What team are you creating? And how are you stripping away some of the labels that may have kept you very rigid and siloed in a form of identity and creating something new? I love that.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize that.
Yeah.
You're really good at summarizing things.
Thank you. That's definitely one of my superpowers. Okay, final question, Rhett, and then we're going to have to wrap up for today. Yeah. If an alien life form, another intelligent life form came to Earth and you, Rhett, are the first human being they interact with, what do they learn about humanity as a result of meeting you?
It sounds interesting. I struggled with that because I don't feel like I have anything better to offer than any other person. So I think if I were to tell them something, I would say, look at each different person and see what spark and magic everybody brings, and don't listen to one person.
Yeah, great.
I mean, that would be what I would tell them.
Right. And the question is also designed to, like, after interacting with you and just being in your presence, what are they learning about humanity?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I would say that about humanity as in our species.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing is that we don't have all the answers. And just to accept us in our dynamic form, whatever century that happens to be, right? And that's just accept us in our present form, how we present ourselves. Don't assume that how the person next to me presents me is actually even me. Just ask me a question.
Yeah,
I'll answer it. And so I guess my what they would learn is that every single human is different and special. Like that's maybe what they would learn, is that just we're all unique and crazy amazing in our multitude of snowflakes.
Yes, it's like a multiverse, right? Multitude of snowflakes in the multiverse. And there's so many different options. Yeah. Amazing. Rhett, thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you for being so raw and honest and vulnerable, because I think this is really powerful, a space to be in, and giving people permission to say, yeah, that happened to me, or this occurred and I'm still here and I'm still smiling and I'm still finding ways to contribute, and you still matter. And so that's really powerful. And thank you for sharing your story with everyone today.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity and being gentle with me.
Of course. No, I'm so pleased that you said yes. And where can people find you, Rhett, if they would like to reach out?
Let's see. Well, we have
LinkedIn.
Yes. So there's my LinkedIn. I will say that on my socials, I am actually private on my socials, my personal socials, pretty private. But so LinkedIn is a great place. And that's probably the only place where I'm actually public. The rest of my socials are private, but the nonprofit that I work with, where I actually take a lot of these lessons, like on neurodiversity and stuff like that, is the Viking Mars Missions Education and Preservation Project. And those socials are open to anybody.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Those are all in the show notes as well. So if anyone would like to reach out to Rhett, please go ahead and do so. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Yeah, appreciate you too. And for everyone who is watching with us live, thank you for being with us live. If you're watching this at a later date, please don't forget you can tag us to ask any questions. We'll come back to you. And if you liked this episode, if you got some value out of it, hit like and subscribe on YouTube, share it with a friend. And as you go into the holidays, remember Rhett's advice to just breathe. We'll see you after a 3-week holiday. We'll be back in mid-January with our next guest, who is an astrobiologist. Thank you and happy holidays.